distraction that gets in the way of the communication between the sender and the receiver. In marketing public relations, we use the word connector quite a bit, and I want to define that for you because it has multiple meanings. In standard PR, we talk about media as the intermediary between you and your audience. So in traditional PR, as we've discussed earlier in the class, and as you've seen in the book, what we're doing is we're putting a message out through a medium. Some journalist, an editor, a TV producer is going to produce a story about our product or service, our company, and they're going to present it to their audience. So the media is the intermediary, the person or organization that stands in between me and my intended audience, between me and the people I'm hoping to buy my product or service. In this particular instance, the media are connectors. They are the people who are the go-betweens between the company or product with a message and the consumer. But since there are so many more intermediaries now in the way we communicate, I've changed the name. I use the word connectors, and that's after coined after something that Malcolm Gladwell had used in one of his books called the tipping point. And it's really anybody or any organization in between. So we can also think of bloggers and people on Twitter and people spreading word of mouth as connectors, as well as media. So media are definitely connectors, but there's also others there. So definition, by way of definition, media groups or individuals who act as a channel for a marketing message resulting in media mentions or the creations of word of mouth. That's what we're talking about when we talk about connectors. And then we have connectors that I will define or talk about as news media. So these are really the media-based connectors. Sometimes we think of advertising media when we speak of media as well, but when we're talking about media connectors, we're really talking about news media. People who are going to produce a story about our company, our brand, our product, not someone who's going to put an advertisement together. Often they're the same entity, but sort of on a different side. The news media is on the editorial side, advertising media is on the advertising and commercial side. So news media is any person or entity that gathers information of potential interest to a segment of the public. They use editorial to turn some raw materials into a distinct work, and they make the product available to the general public, right? So it's through purchase of a magazine or a newspaper, or through a subscription, or through free distribution, say like television. So try to think of media in two segments, news media and advertising media. In much of marketing, we're talking about advertising media, but when we're talking about marketing public relations, we are talking about news media. And then we have this word we call content. If you're interested in public relations, the word content is something you're going to hear quite a bit. If you're a communications major or a journalism major, you're probably familiar with the term. But it's really the stuff in the media that's the meat. It's the articles, it's the editorials, it's the non-advertising elements of media. Articles, columns, feature stories, editorials, those sorts of things. It's the stuff that takes up the space between the advertisements. This is critically important because this is where we as marketing public relations people want our stories to be told. So when we look at media, there are several formats or classifications. So typically we think about print media being newspapers, magazines, or trade journals. We think about broadcast media, predominantly television or radio, and electronic media, which is websites, blogs, even social networking like Facebook and MySpace and Twitter can come up on the electronic side. And then there's the trade media. Trade media tends to be largely print, but when we think of trade media, or we talk about trade media, it's a business-to-business channel rather than a business-to-consumer channel. So there can be lots of overlap between trade and consumer media. Trade media does get into all three of these categories, print, broadcast, and electronics, but they don't do much on the broadcast side. So you'll see trade journals and websites for industrial organizations. That's what we're talking about when we talk about trade. So the format's very similar. And we can also classify media by other means. And what we see here are just a few of the ways that we can do it. We can classify media by geography. So when we think about a network-affiliated news station, like the CBS affiliate in New York or Philadelphia, that's what we mean when we talk about geography. If we look at a newspaper like the Morning Call of Allentown, we can classify that as something that covers the Lehigh Valley or Northampton and Lehigh counties in Pennsylvania. So that's a way we can classify a type of medium. We can also look at a medium by its size. We can look at putting things out in a very small medium, has its advantages and disadvantages, or we look for something large. If we look in our own backyards here, we have a lot of weekly local newspapers, something like, say, the Parkland Press, and anything put out by East Penn Publishing. They're weekly newspapers. They're small, and they just talk about local topics within a given school district. Some communities have these for free. Others, they're subscription-based. Why are they good? If you've got a product or a story that has local impact, it's a really great place to go, and often you get very good coverage because there's not a lot of stories that are there. On the other side, we can look at something with very wide consumption or wide distribution, something like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal that's read all across the world. It's got big numbers. If you get a story into those media, people around the world are going to take notice. So the size can be an advantage there, but your story could also get lost in a medium of that size. So we weigh those out when we look at putting our media list together. We could sort it by topic. If anybody's been to the magazine section of a large bookstore like Borders or Barnes & Noble, you will quickly notice that there is a magazine published, or several magazines published, on just about every topic you can think of, from guns to knitting to every kind of sports imaginable. So we can classify media in that fashion. And then we can also classify media by beats. And when we do this, we're actually classifying the journalists themselves. If we look at magazines and newspapers, it's fairly easy to see that certain reporters cover certain topics, and they certainly wouldn't cover others. So if we look at the typical local regional newspaper within the public interest section, it's often called like the life section, and that's how the Morning Call classifies it. They'll have one reporter that reports on gardening, another that will report on food in restaurants, one that will report on entertainment. Each of those things we'll consider in marketing public relations as a beat. So when we put together a media list, often we will classify individual journalists and editors by the beats that they cover. So if we have a story that might be interesting to them, we know to send them a press release or whatever other type of material they need to get, so we can entice them to cover our story. When we look at an individual medium, we are not only looking at the medium itself, but we are very interested in their audience. Matter of fact, that's our primary focus. Who does that medium reach? And when we try and evaluate a medium, we're looking at that medium from a demographic and a psychographic point of view. So who are those people? Who do we want to reach with our message? And demographics, as you know from your introduction to marketing class, has to do with things that we quantify or can quantify. So that's things like age, income, gender, geography as where you live. And then there's also the psychographic determinants, and these have more to do with lifestyle and attitudes and values. A little more difficult to quantify, but they're the sort of things that we want to look at when we look at the audience of a medium. So when we look at a medium, what kind of opportunities do we have for marketing public relations? How do we get media mentioned? So there's several media opportunities out there. There's a few more defined in the book, but we'll briefly talk about a few here. We can have an editorial. That means something that is actually written by us. So it could be something in the editorial page that is written by us, or it could be an editorial written by a journalist. So any article, feature story, that sort of thing can be considered an editorial. Anything that's in the content side of a newspaper. We could actually pen expert articles. We can do that ourselves, or we can have some other type of expert write it for us. So if we have a company that makes a particular product, we can have an expert within or without our company write something up about how this company benefits or how this product benefits its customers. We could also write case studies, and you'll have the experience, the ability to write one yourselves in a later assignment. And these are usually put in a problem-solution format. Here's a problem, and it can be solved using this particular product or service from our company. We can also use events as marketing public relations. We can announce events in the media. We can entice the media outlets to cover our events to give us further coverage. And then we can also provide interviews. The experts in our company are a very valuable resource, and when we make those experts available to the media, we increase our likelihood of getting pickup or news coverage in that medium. So if we have an expert that knows something about a certain type of food or certain type of wine, we would want to talk to the editors, the food editors of a newspaper or a group of newspapers in our region and say, hey, we've got this expert. If you ever are writing a story about wine and need an expert to comment on that, please call this person. So that increases our chances of getting some media pickup. All right, these days we've also got a group of connectors that are what we call non-media connectors. This is a group that really didn't even exist 10 years ago, and they're one of the most important segments of connectors today. We can think about any person or organization who monitors, analyzes, and shares information about a product or an industry. You all should be reading or have read Citizen Marketers by Ben McConnell and Jackie Huba, and their book really, really goes into depth about non-media connectors. They're people who are experts usually because they want to be. They can be paid. Often they're not, and usually they're not employed by a media organization. So even though there are some bloggers in media organizations, we normally put those people into the media connector or journalist category. So there's a link on this page for super blogger Steve Johnson, who blogs about beef jerky. This is an example of a non-media connector. I've seen blogs and people who use Facebook and Twitter very effectively for all sorts of topics, from Formula One racing to scissors used for crafts and scrapbooking, to root beer, to wine, to you name it. If there's a hobby or somebody who thinks about something, there are non-media connectors out there talking about it, blogging about it, acting as filters and building communities about a particular product, service, hobby, what have you. It's certainly of great use to us as marketers when we're trying to spread the word about our marketer. Just like we go out and try to find media that would cover stories about us, it's really a good idea to go find these non-media connectors and entice them to talk about